So again, welcome. Well, tell us what's going on back home in Houston with the rest of the family. Yeah, that's probably
I want to do that. I want to first. Gosh, I got to say some things. Let me say some things first.
Go for it.
When we created the endowment years ago, the first year that we had an endowment event, Clay Turner came back and spoke. Clay was the rector here from 75 to 90. And this is a gross paraphrase. But I was, this is weird, but that night at the dinner, I found myself in the restroom at the urinal next to Clay. and I said something about, we had the Shenandoah Club that year, and I said something about how great it was that you came back. And he said something to the effect of, it's so hard to come back because you love people so much. And gosh, I just have to say, thank you, Eric, for the invitation. Thank you, Jane. It's hard to come back because I just love you so much. And so I see you all. We love you. So Heath Light, I could almost tell a story about everybody in the room. I'm just going to tell a few. Just going to mention a few. Bishop, what a model for how to be in the church you have been for me and still are. This book, I'll say, would not have happened were Wink Weaver not in the world. Wink Weaver invited me to Fork in the Alley one night, said, let's have a beer. And we sat down, and Wink said, I want you to figure out a way to talk about issues in the world, in the church. And I said, Wink, I don't know how to do that. And I didn't. But it started me on a journey that resulted in the Faith and Society Seminar, which began here and has continued in Houston. And this book is really an outgrowth, really, of the Faith and Society Seminar. Forrest Moore, when I was coming in to interview with the search committee, it is Forrest Moore that picked me up at the airport. So the first St. John's parishioner that I met in the flesh was Forrest. That same visit, Shirley Kingery took me to dinner at Wildflower is where we went, and old Dev Jevra walked in and saw us sitting there and tried to grill Shirley for details, and she towed the line and wouldn't say a word. Barbara Johnson, of course, was the chairperson of that search committee, and Robert Brailsford taught me how to hunt. Boy from Arkansas, good Lord, you'd think he'd know how to hunt. And it's just, everybody in this room, you are part of the story of my life. You're part of the book of my life. And so I love you. And it is so great to be back. Jill Thompson has texted me throughout the afternoon and said, what are you doing now? Who are you seeing now? What are you doing now? So Jill sends her love. If Griffin were not an 18-year-old boy, he'd send his love too. He's doing fine. Eliza's doing fine. Griffin is a senior in high school. As I've said to several people tonight, I thought his entire upbringing as I was raising this child to know how to call the hogs. Do y'all know I'm from Arkansas? I thought he'd want to go to a good small liberal arts college like Hendrix and just drive up to the football games. And lo and behold, he's going to the University of Arkansas. He's all in, like the whole thing he wants to do, the big state school thing, and I don't get it. But he's doing well. He will graduate from Episcopal High School, God willing, in May. Eliza is a freshman. One day at Center in the Square, on one of the innumerable weekend festivals that were going on in downtown Roanoke, Floyd Ward had a bunch of dancers out there, and they were doing this dancing. I'm not from Appalachia. They were doing this dancing that looked kind of like tap dancing, but was so much more frenetic. And it was, of course, clogging, but I'd never seen clogging before, and it was the best thing I'd ever seen. And I called Jill on my giant brick of a cell phone back then, and I said, you and Eliza need to come down and see this right now. And they came down, and Eliza, who was knee-high to a grasshopper at the time, saw those dancers, and Ann Muir knows this, was mesmerized, and joined Floyd Ward the next week. And now she is a competitive dancer that wins awards in jazz and lyrical and tap and is dancing literally even as we speak, dances 3 or 4 nights a week till 9:30 at night. It's mostly what she does. And as I said to somebody earlier She is still a daddy's girl. She's still a little girl most of the time, except when she's dancing. And I see this woman on stage with this body control. I mean, y'all, you may recall at my going away party, y'all made me line dance, which was awful. I can't walk and chew gum, but Eliza has this body control and this poise, which is just remarkable. Jill is doing very well. We have just purchased a home. We have lived in a rectory for the last 6 years, which is not ideal. And so we have just purchased a home, and Jill's super excited about that. I had the good sense to have nothing to do with that. Jill picked out that house, and Eliza confirmed it, and I said, okay, that's the house we'll buy. As you know, Jill is a physical therapist, and she has worked for most of the past 6 years at TIER. Some of you will know that, will recall that name when the Congresswoman Gabby Giffords was shot and had a traumatic brain injury. She was sent to Houston to the medical center to TIER, which is the neurological or world-class neurological rehab center. Early in Jill's physical therapy career, that's the kind of physical therapy that she had done. And then because she married a fellow who went to seminary and became a priest, and we moved for seminary and to Memphis and to Roanoke, she mostly worked in orthopedic rehab, which is important work, and she loved it. But when we got to Houston, she was able to get back to TIER and to do neurological work, which she loved. Somehow, along the way, unbelievably, Jill and I became middle-aged people. It's just striking. And you'll see me pull out reading glasses in a minute. I don't know how that happened. But when you're 47 years old, manipulating big people is a lot different than when you're 27 years old. And so within the last year, Jill has taken a new job at Amazing Place, which is a world-class center for those suffering from mild to moderate dementia. And she's, in essence, doing a form of case management. She's helping families work out care plans for folks who are at the front end of the long journey of dementia to help them connect to resources and to help them navigate what that road looks like. And so she is still far and away the better person in the Thompson couple, and she is doing that good work to help people in just the mourning of the long day of that need. And I'm proud of her and pleased by her, and she misses all of you and wishes that she could be here. So we're doing well. It's hard to believe I've been at Christ Church. I have now been at Christ Church Cathedral longer than I was at St. John's in Roanoke. And that is unbelievable to me in many ways. But as many of you knew then and know now, that part of Texas is, on my father's side of the family, very much home. It is where the Thompsons are from. I'm a member of the Sons of the Republic of Texas, which means nothing in the Old Dominion, but there it means something. So we're doing well. I am able to say that without reservation only because you are doing well. You are so blessed and privileged to have the Long family among you, to have those two beautiful girls, and certainly to have Shelley and Eric. And it allows me to feel good about where I am and what I am doing, because I know that you are in such good hands. And you finally got a rector who can preach. Which is good for you and good for Eric. So we're doing well.
That's great. Thank you, by the way. Well, I think that folks want to hear about the church in Houston and Houston in general. Obviously huge transition in many ways from this size of a city to this massive, sprawling city. I had the chance to go and visit you there and see a lot of the ministries that are going on, the new ministries right in the midst of the city, in the heart of downtown. And I wonder if you would just kind of let folks know about your work that you're doing there and what's going on at the cathedral.
Sure. What only slightly tongue-in-cheek, the way I will start to answer that question is, I can tell you what was going on there yesterday morning, but it's such a frenetic place. I really don't know. It's 5:15 in the evening the next day, and so who knows? Houston is an enormous place. By 2025, it will have eclipsed Chicago and become the third largest city in the United States. It is by far and away, Amur and folks with experience in LA might debate this to some extent, but it is such a huge sprawling city and has no real public transportation, which is a challenge. There's actually an app online. You can take the footprint of any city in the world and superimpose it on any other geographic area. And so you can take if you place the city of Houston geographically over the city of New York, it's like 4 times as large geographically because it sprawls so very much. That's a challenge for a downtown parish. The cathedral is the oldest house of worship in Houston. On March 16th of this year, we celebrated our 180th anniversary. Now that's not as old as St. John's, Roanoke, but when you think about the fact that Texas became the Republic of Texas in 1837, and 2 years later, Christ Church became the first house of worship of any kind in Houston, it's as old as it gets in Texas. And it's in the heart of downtown, and it's the only congregation that has stayed in the heart of downtown. As the city has grown by concentric circles, everybody else has fled over time. And Christ Church has always understood its mission to be, as Psalm 46:5 says, to proclaim God in the midst of the city, in the heart of the downtown. Sometimes the fortunes of downtown Houston wax, and sometimes they wane. But regardless, the cathedral has stayed constant. And that is, 6 years ago, part of what was compelling about it to me, and it's what remains compelling for me today. The city of Houston, like any United States city of its size, has huge issues with regard to homelessness. The city of Houston, because of where it is located geographically, is, again, perhaps only in competition with LA, has issues of immigration, both legal and otherwise, both documented and otherwise, unlike virtually any other major metropolitan area in the country. And so very much of what we do as we proclaim God in the midst of the city of Christ Church is deal with issues of those who live on the very margins of society. We operate the Beacon, which is the largest homeless center for the Center for the Homeless in Houston. We feed 300 homeless men and women 5 days a week. We have a legal clinic, a pro bono legal clinic, medical clinic, offer them showers, offer them laundry, and serve as the city of Houston's central hub to move people from homelessness into permanent supportive housing. So if you're homeless and on the street in Houston and you come to the Beacon, you are logged into a system that, God willing, ultimately results in you being placed not just in permanent housing, but permanent supportive housing. The model used to be, and still is in many cities, we all know, I think, from St. John's work with the rescue mission, you know as well, the vast majority of those who are chronically homeless, not those who have just fallen off the grid because of job loss or medical emergency, but those who are chronically living on the street are overwhelmingly either addicted to some controlled substance or mentally ill, or both, in many cases both. The old model used to be, if you'll get on your mental health meds, or if you'll get clean and sober, then we'll help you find housing, right? That is great, and I understand that impulse. It is also a recipe for failure. If you are living on the streets, sometimes that bottle or that puff is all that gets you through the day. So the permanent supportive housing model instead says, if you're living on the streets chronically, we're going to put you in housing, but we're going to set you up for success. It's going to be permanent supportive housing. Whereas part of the housing, we're going to have addiction services, and we're going to have mental health services. So once we get you in a place of safety and security, not exposed to the elements, then we will work with you to help you kick your addiction or help you get on your mental health meds. Now, on the front end, that's more expensive, but I promise you, in the long term, it is far less expensive. If you can get someone off the streets and help them become integrated back into society, then a year, 2 years, 5 years down the road, the public dole is not going to be predominantly supporting that person. So 25 years ago, my predecessor, Dean Walter Taylor, at the cathedral created New Hope Housing. which the cathedral built and then spun off as a separate nonprofit, and it's now the largest single resident occupancy supported housing builder in Houston. It's built over 1,000 units. And now at the cathedral, through the Beacon, we move people from homelessness into that housing. This is not just because of Christ Church and not just because of the New Hope, but in the last 8 years, chronic homelessness in Houston has dropped by more than 50%. Veteran homelessness in Houston has dropped to 0%. Now that doesn't mean there are no veterans on the street, but it does mean, I can take no credit for that. It should. What it means is there are permanent supported housing units enough that every veteran on the street could be housed. And those are huge strides, and the cathedral has been, for 180 years really, has been an instrumental part of that work. We're also a big parish church. The cathedral is a great big place. We have a large Latino congregation that meets. We don't ask how many of those folks are documented or not, because it makes me absolutely no difference whether or not they're documented or not when it comes to where they worship in a safe place that communicates the presence of God to them. And then we have 600 Anglos that worship through a number of services throughout the day in addition to that. So it's a big parish church in addition to being a place that does all of that other work.
It's a most impressive presence that does exist in the midst of the city. And I think, which I'll circle back around to in a second, I think that inevitably the topic of your book has to emerge in such a setting. I also want you all to know that one of the things that your support after the terrible hurricanes, Harvey, right? It was Harvey. There's been some, and what Barkley was doing was helping people stay in housing, and doing that through money that you all gave, and so can be proud of that work happening there.
So you all. Hurricane Harvey hit in the fall of 2017, in late August, the 4th week of August 2017. And there's no one in Houston who does not have some post-traumatic stress as a result of that storm. Now, Houston is an incredibly resilient city. And so, for the most part, if you were to come to Houston today, you'd never know. We had the second most expensive and arguably the most destructive with regard to property storm in U.S. history, less than 2 years ago. But I don't know if you recall, but by the fall of 2017, even before that storm hit, I was sort of despairing about the world. I don't know if you share that at all, but just the way that we interact with one another, it was, and then the storm hits. Thank God the Astros didn't win the World Series, because that helped a lot. But Second Pres and more than and other parishes across the country, but more than anyone, you reminded me that the communion of saints is not just a theory; it's real. Eric calls and says, we need to figure out a plan, because I got people, my phone's ringing off the hook, people from St. John's want to send money to Houston. Can you take it? And I'm like, yeah, I can take it. and then like 3 weeks later he calls back, and like 2 weeks after that he calls back and says, we just need to kind of open a pipeline, which is something we know a little bit about in Houston, to get this hurricane money there. So I want to tell you just a word about that. So here's what happened. Lots of people were flooded out of their homes. Lots of people were flooded out of their homes. But that was not the most insidious. The most insidious thing that happened, the hurricane hit on something like August 24th. On September 10th, the grace period for those whose rent was due on September 1st ended. And what happened in swaths of the city that were not flooded was that predatory landlords whose residents worked in the service industries of Houston, all of which had been shut down for 3 weeks, people who work in restaurants, people who work in hotels, people who work at service stations and auto body shops, people who are largely immigrants in Houston, had not been paid since their August 15th paycheck. and they could not make their rent. And so their predatory landlord said, "Not my problem. You're out." Which would have meant that those folks would have had no choice but to go to the NRG Stadium and the George R. Brown Convention Center and all of the flood refugee centers that were already maxed to capacity. And there would have been a whole second wave of people needing frontline services with no place to sleep. So you know from me, from stewardship campaigns, that I generally do not believe that shame is a very good motivator. But we started, Christ Church Cathedral, we started calling landlords. And we started saying, you think the Valdez family is alone. That's not true. They're connected to Christ Church Cathedral. There are 3,500 of us, and more than a few are lawyers. So we believe you need to rethink. It was a Heath-like moment. Only one I've ever gotten to have, Bishop. We said, we believe you need to rethink this because we know people at the news stations, and we know people in law enforcement, and we know people who are attorneys. And if you think you're going to put these people on the street, you may get a knock on your door, and it's not going to be them next time. They were the most satisfying phone calls I've ever made in my life. And the one, I even said to one person, I believe Jesus has something to say about that. And you may not think so today, but one day that's going to be important to you. And for those who would, and lots of them listened, right? Not because they worried about Jesus. I mean, if you're going to kick somebody out after a hurricane, Jesus is not what you're worried about, right? That's part of the problem. But they were worried about the public perception. But for those who would not, your money is what kept lots of those people in their apartments. Until the cleanup happened, until power was restored across the city, and until people could get back to work. We paid rent for untold numbers of people who otherwise would have been out on the street. So know that that's what you did. I didn't do that. All I had to do was pick up a phone and write a check. You did that work because you were generous and kind. And I'm forever grateful.
Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Before we jump in, I think we've already kind of explained why the topic is somewhat inevitable for a church downtown, really any church that's paying attention, to get into. But what I love, in your statement, and thank you, everybody in the room knows it was 100% wrong. This church has had great preaching here.
Sandy
Webb
was a great preacher.
But as somebody who loves preaching and actually finds the art of putting together sermons and doing sermons and knowing that the first audience is always me, and that great teacher of pastors, Eugene Peterson, said that the church is that place that allows preachers to become what they're saying. And knowing that to be the true elements of grace and the new book both deal with your preaching.
Right. And
so I'm just kind of interested in the fact of, how it is that preaching has worked in your life in this powerful way, and why the books have centered on that portion of your ministry.
That's a great question. There's that quote in Jeremiah. I think it's Jeremiah. I'm an Episcopalian. I can paraphrase scripture. Pretty sure it's Jeremiah. It's the epitaph in my first book, Elements of Grace. I think it's Jeremiah, where the prophet is asked, why do you preach? And Jeremiah says, if you say to me, speak no more of him, I will respond to you, I cannot. When I attempt to quit speaking, there is a burning in my bones. And that is I ran away from ordination from at least the age of 16 until I went to seminary at age 27. And finally I had to quit running because sometimes people will ask me, I don't know if you're this way, or other Mary Mackin or Heath White are this way, or David Olson, who I saw walk in, but people will sometimes ask me, when did you know you wanted to be a priest? And my response, which is never tongue-in-cheek, is the first day I'll let you know. I have never wanted to be a priest. I wanted to be the governor of Arkansas. I mean, that's self-evident, right? But for 10 years, I tried to be something else, and I ended up having laid out on the floor world-spinning panic attacks. And to this day, I don't believe that I could be fulfilled or content doing anything other than being a priest. So it's never been about want. It's always been about calling. And it's always been about the only time in my life. That's not quite true. There are 2 times in my life when I experience myself as doing seamlessly what God created me to do. One of those is when I'm having a one-on-one, wholly attentive interaction with Griffin or Eliza. That's the truth. They're teenagers, so that's rare. But when it happens, there's a holiness to it that is the rightest, realest thing I know, besides when I'm preaching or teaching. I just don't know how to do anything else. It's a good thing I do this, because I don't know how to do anything else. Right? I would not be good at anything else to the extent that I'm good at this. I would not be good at anything else. So it's, and then the question becomes things like the pieces in this book. You know this because you know me, but I've been going around the country talking about this book, and most people that where I speak don't know me. And even last night I was in Memphis, and a couple dozen people from Holy Apostles, my first parish, came to hear me speak, but most of the people there were not. They were Episcopalians for the most part. And one person asked during the Q&A, "You sound so sure. How can you be so sure?" And I was reminded of when Marcus Borg spoke here for the Dodson lecture, and someone asked him in the question and answer, "Dr. Borg, how do you know you're right?" And his response, he leaned on the pulpit, and he looked out, and he had this sort of thoughtful look in his eye, and he said, I don't. And that was the beginning, and he didn't expound. That was the beginning and end of his answer. And I guess what I would say is about, that I really don't preach that often about events in the world. I don't like to preach about events in the world. I really don't. I'd much rather tell a story about my grandmother Boo, which I did last Sunday, as a matter of fact. When I speak to an event in the world, particularly from the pulpit, because it's a bully pulpit in both the TR sense, which means great, right, and in the sense of you don't get to talk back. I really don't like to talk about events in the world in that setting. I'd much rather it be at a faith and society seminar when we can all talk together about it. But there are those times, and when I feel convicted to speak, and I always do so, and I'm sure you do too. And I don't mean this metaphorically. I always do so with trembling knees. When I step into the pulpit, and I know I'm about to open my mouth and utter what I believe to be, but about which I could be wrong, a gospel word, my knees tremble. It's a good thing we wear robes, right? So it is a tremendous, meaning tremendums. That word comes from to tremble. It is a tremendous experience to get up and preach about these things.